The dusty saloons of 1870s Arizona territory had become auction houses for human misery. And tonight, 3 black sisters stood chained before a crowd of drunken settlers, bidding on their lives. Isaiah Kane, a former Buffalo soldier turned bounty hunter, had tracked Sheriff Morgan's illegal slavery operation to this exact moment. But when Isaiah kicked down the saloon door with guns drawn, he discovered the sisters weren't helpless victims waiting for rescue. They were undercover federal agents who had orchestrated their own capture as bait, and now Isaiah's 2-year hunt for the corrupt sheriff who murdered his family would collide with their mission to expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of territorial government. Isaiah thought he was saving 3 women, but they were about to save an entire people. The oil lamps cast long shadows across the dusty saloon floor. 3 women stood chained on a makeshift platform, while drunken settlers shouted numbers into the smoky air. The auctioneer's voice cracked with whiskey and greed. Celia stood tallest among the sisters. Her eyes swept the crowd with the calculating gaze of someone who had memorized every face. Beside her, Naomi's hands flexed against her bonds. The youngest, Ruth, kept her head down, but her ears sharp. The saloon door exploded inward. Wood splintered. Hinges screamed. Isaiah Kane stepped through the wreckage with twin Colts drawn. His buffalo soldier coat bore dust from 100 miles of hard riding. "This ends now, Morgan." Sheriff Morgan's hand dropped to his holster. The lawman's star on his chest caught the lamplight like a target. His face split into a grin that held no warmth. Well, Isaiah Kane should have stayed dead. The room held its breath. Settlers pressed against walls, cards scattered from abandoned poker tables. Someone's whiskey glass hit the floor and shattered. Isaiah's guns never wavered. "Let them go." "Can't do that, soldier boy. Business is business." The first shot came from an unexpected direction. Celia had produced a derringer from somewhere in her boot. The bullet took out the nearest oil lamp. Glass exploded. Fire scattered. Darkness swallowed the room. Gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit faces in brief, hellish snapshots. Men dove for cover behind overturned tables. Someone screamed. Another lamp went down. When the smoke cleared, the platform stood empty. Broken chains lay coiled like dead snakes. 7 men groaned on the sawdust floor, unconscious but breathing. "Sheriff." Morgan clutched his shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers. Isaiah and the 3 sisters had vanished into the night. The desert canyon offered shelter before dawn. Red rock walls rose like cathedral spires toward stars that were already fading. Isaiah built a small fire in a circle of stones while the women tended their wrists where the shackles had bitten. Naomi watched him with suspicious eyes. "Why should we follow another man with a gun?" Isaiah didn't look up from the flames. "You don't have to follow anyone." Ruth moved closer to examine a bullet graze on his arm. Her fingers were gentle but sure. She noticed the tattoos beneath his rolled sleeves. Military markings. Buffalo Soldier ink. "You served," she said. "I did." Celia stood apart from the group. Her dress was torn, but her spine remained straight. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "We weren't being sold," she said. "We were the bait." Isaiah's hands stilled on his coffee cup. "What?" "We orchestrated our own capture to get close to Sheriff Morgan." Celia's eyes held steady on his face. "We're Freedmen's Bureau agents investigating illegal slavery operations in this territory." The fire crackled. Wind moved through the canyon, like whispered secrets. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Isaiah's voice was quiet. "I've been hunting Morgan for 2 years." "Because we didn't know whose side you were on." Naomi spat into the dust. "Still don't." Ruth finished bandaging Isaiah's arm. Her touch lingered a moment longer than necessary. "We're all after the same man. Maybe we should be asking why." Isaiah stood and walked to the canyon's edge. The desert stretched endlessly under starlight. Somewhere out there, Morgan was gathering his men. Somewhere out there, time was running short. "What else did you learn?" he asked without turning around. Celia reached into her bodice and withdrew a folded document. The paper was expensive, official, stamped with territorial seals. Morgan's network reaches higher than we thought. He's been using Judge Whitman to legitimize his operations. The judge signs papers thinking they're labor contracts. They're actually bills of sale. Isaiah turned back to face them. Whitman's the only honest lawman in 3 counties. Which is why exposing this destroys him too. Celia's voice carried the weight of impossible choices. If we bring down Morgan, we take down the one man trying to bring real law to this territory. Ruth looked up from sorting their stolen documents. Her face had gone pale in the firelight. There's more. She held up another paper. This one bore official military letterhead, maps, troop movements, reservation, boundaries marked in red ink. Operation Clearwater, she read. Morgan's planning to raid 3 Apache reservations. He'll sell the families into slavery while reporting them as killed in territorial conflicts. The fire seemed to dim. Even the wind held still. How many? Isaiah's voice was barely a whisper. 200 families, including children. Ruth's hands shook as she set the document down. It happens tomorrow night. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them. 4 people, less than 24 hours. An entire network of corruption, 200 innocent lives hanging in the balance. Isaiah picked up his rifle and checked the action. The metal clicked with mechanical precision. Then we'd better get moving. Celia stepped forward. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice. Sometimes they're the same thing. Naomi stood and dusted off her skirts. And sometimes they're not. The fire burned down to embers. Dawn painted the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere in the distance, dust clouds marked the approach of Morgan's posse. Time was running out. The dust clouds grew larger on the horizon. Morgan's posse rode hard across the broken desert, their horses leaving wounds in the red earth. Isaiah counted at least 12 riders through his field glasses. We need to move, he said. They broke camp in silence. Celia tucked the stolen documents into a leather satchel. Ruth gathered their meager supplies. Naomi checked the loads in her borrowed pistol. The sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered off the canyon walls like ghostly dancers. They followed a game trail through the rocks. Single file. No talking. Isaiah led while Naomi brought up the rear. Her eyes never stopped scanning their back trail. The horses had to be abandoned at the river. The water ran swift and cold from mountain snowmelt. On the far bank, they would be on foot, exposed, vulnerable. Isaiah tested the current with a long stick. The water came up to his waist in the middle. Treacherous, but passable. Ruth can't swim, Celia said. I'll carry her across. Naomi stepped forward. No, I will. The 2 women locked eyes. Something passed between them. Understanding. Trust earned through shared danger. Ruth climbed onto Naomi's back. The older sister waded into the rushing water with careful steps. Each footfall tested the rocky bottom before committing weight. Halfway across, Ruth spoke quietly into Naomi's ear. He's not what he seems. None of us are. Isaiah and Celia followed behind. The current tugged at their legs like grasping hands. Cold water soaked through their clothes. The documents in Celia's satchel had to stay dry. Everything depended on those papers. On the far shore, they rested in the shade of cottonwood trees. Their wet clothes steamed in the desert heat. Isaiah's boots squelched with each step. Tell me about your family, Ruth said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Isaiah's hand stilled on his rifle cleaning. For a long moment, only the river spoke. Morgan killed them during a patrol 3 years ago. His voice was steady, but his knuckles went white around the cleaning rod. Said they were harboring stolen goods. They weren't. Celia looked up from wringing water from her skirts. What were their names? Sarah. Little Mary. The names came out like prayers. Mary was learning to read. Sarah made the best cornbread in 3 counties. Ruth's eyes softened. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Naomi spat into the dust. You think that uniform made you righteous? You still serve the same country that enslaved us. Isaiah's jaw tightened. I served so people like your sisters could be free. Free? Naomi's laugh held no humor. Look around, soldier boy. How's that working out? The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Wind moved through the cottonwood leaves with the sound of distant rain. Celia stood and shouldered her satchel. We need to keep moving. They climbed out of the river valley into harder country. Broken mesas, scattered sage, ground that betrayed every footstep to watching eyes. The sun reached its zenith and began its descent. Still no sign of pursuit. Isaiah began to hope they had lost Morgan's men at the river crossing. Then Ruth pointed to a distant ridge. Dust rose against the sky like a signal fire. They're splitting up, Isaiah said, trying to box us in. Celia studied the terrain ahead, a maze of arroyos and wind-carved rock, places to hide, places to get trapped. We need to separate, she said. Cover more ground. Isaiah shook his head. Too dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. Celia's voice carried the weight of command. You and Naomi take the high ground. Ruth and I will follow. The wash. Naomi stepped closer to Isaiah. You better not get my sister killed. Same to you. They parted ways at a fork in the ancient creek bed. Isaiah and Naomi climbed toward the mesa top. Celia and Ruth descended into the shadowed arroyo. The climb was brutal. Loose shale, thorny brush, air so thin it burned the lungs. But from the top they could see for miles in every direction. Morgan's men had indeed split their forces. 2 groups of 6 riders each, one following the river, one circling wide to cut off escape routes. Isaiah settled behind a boulder with his rifle. The scope brought the distant riders into sharp focus. He could have taken one, maybe 2, but the sound would bring the others running. Naomi crouched beside him. Her breathing was steady despite the climb. Why do you really want Morgan dead? I told you. You told me part of it. She studied his face like she was reading a map. There's more. Below them, dust devils danced across the desert floor. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. He didn't just kill them, Isaiah said finally. He made me watch. The words fell between them like stones into still water. Naomi's expression didn't change, but her hand found his shoulder. How? Tied me to a post. Said it was a lesson about what happens to troublemakers. Isaiah's voice grew quiet. Sarah tried to run to me. He shot her in the back. Mary was hiding under the porch. He dragged her out. Naomi's fingers tightened on his shoulder. How old? 7. They sat in silence as the sun continued its descent. The storm clouds grew larger. Lightning flickered in their depths like trapped fire. My father was the plantation owner, Celia had told Ruth during their own journey through the arroyo. That's how I learned to read. He used to bring me books. Ruth's perfect memory had cataloged every word of every document they'd stolen, but this revelation stopped her in her tracks. He sold you. When his wife found out about us, said it was better than the alternative. Celia's voice held no bitterness, just the flat acceptance of hard truth. I was 12. They walked deeper into the shadows. Ancient water had carved these channels. Now they were dry as bone. Naomi killed our last master, Celia continued. Man tried to separate us, sell me and Ruth to different buyers. She put a kitchen knife in his heart. Ruth nodded. She remembered that night. The blood, the running, the fear that never quite went away. Is that why she's so angry? She's angry because she thinks killing him made her like him. Celia stepped around a boulder the size of a wagon. She doesn't understand that sometimes killing is the only mercy left. Thunder rumbled overhead. The first drops of rain struck the dust like tiny bullets. In the arroyo, The women sought shelter under an overhang. On the mesa, Isaiah and Naomi pressed themselves against the rocks as the storm broke. Rain fell, in sheets. It turned dust to mud and filled the dry washes with rushing water. It also washed away tracks, covered sound, made pursuit nearly impossible. When the storm passed, they regrouped at an abandoned line shack. The roof leaked, but the walls held. A place to rest, to plan, to share the truths that distance had made possible. Ruth tended a small fire while the others dried their clothes. Steam rose from damp fabric. The smell of wet sage drifted through broken windows. "There's something else," Ruth said to Celia, "about Judge Whitman." Celia looked up from cleaning her derringer. "I've been writing to him, sending reports through the Freedmen's Bureau." Ruth's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's not naive about those documents he's been signing." The fire crackled. Rain dripped through the leaky roof. "What do you mean?" Ruth's perfect memory recalled every letter, every coded message, every careful phrase that had passed between them. "Judge Whitman is our father." The words hit like lightning. Celia's derringer clattered to the floor. Outside, the storm moved on toward distant mountains, but inside the line shack a different kind of tempest was just beginning. The fire died to embers while Celia stared at her youngest sister. Ruth's words hung in the smoky air like a curse that couldn't be taken back. "Our father." Celia's voice was barely a whisper. Her hands trembled as she retrieved the derringer from the floor. Ruth nodded. "He's been building his own case against Morgan, using his position to document everything. He knew we were coming." Isaiah and Naomi exchanged glances. Family secrets had a way of changing everything. Trust became complicated when blood was involved. "How long have you known?" Celia asked. "Since the beginning. He's the one who got us this assignment." Ruth's perfect memory unfolded the truth like pages from a book. "He couldn't protect us when we were children. This was his way of trying to protect us now." The wind outside had died too. Nothing. The desert held its breath. Celia stood and walked to the broken window. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns older than memory. Somewhere out there, Morgan's men were still hunting. Somewhere out there, 200 Apache families were sleeping their last night of freedom. "It doesn't change anything," she said. "We still have less than 18 hours. Isaiah checked his pocket watch by the dying firelight. "We need to make a choice. Save my family or stop Operation Clearwater." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. 4 people, 2 impossible tasks. Not enough time for both. Naomi spoke first. "How do we know your family is even alive?" Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Morgan sends me proof, pictures, letters in Sarah's handwriting. Could be fake. Could be real." Ruth stood and began pacing the small room. Her mind worked like a machine, sorting through possibilities, calculating odds, searching for the solution that didn't exist. "There has to be another way," she said. Celia turned from the window. "What are you thinking?" "We use my memory. Recreate the documents, plant false information about the timing." Ruth's words came faster as the plan took shape. "We surrender ourselves to Morgan. Give him fake intelligence, lead his forces into a trap." Isaiah shook his head. "Too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now." Ruth's voice carried the same authority as her older sister. "Judge Whitman can position federal marshals. Spring the trap when Morgan's forces are committed. And my family? They're either alive or they're not. But 200 Apache families are definitely going to die tomorrow night if we don't act." The words cut deep. Isaiah's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed against abandoning his wife and daughter. But the math was cold and unforgiving. Naomi stepped closer to him. "You came here to stop Morgan. This stops Morgan. It might get us all killed." "Might." Celia rejoined the group. "But doing nothing definitely gets those families killed." Isaiah walked to the door and stared out into the darkness. The desert stretched endlessly under starlight. Somewhere, in that vast emptiness, Morgan held his family captive. Somewhere else, Apache children slept beside their parents for the last time. "If we do this, there's no going back," he said. Ruth began tearing pages from her stolen documents. Her perfect memory guided her hands as she rewrote reports, changed dates, altered troop movements, created a convincing lie that would send Morgan's forces to the wrong place at the wrong time. "The trap has to look real," she said. "Morgan's suspicious by nature." Celia watched her sister work. "What do you need from us?" "We stage our own capture. Make it look like Morgan caught us." Ruth's pen scratched across the paper. "But we control what information he gets." Dawn was still hours away when they heard the horses, hoofbeats on hard ground, the jingle of bridles. Men's voices carried on the still air. Isaiah peered through a crack in the wall. 6 riders, Morgan's with them. They had minutes to prepare. Ruth finished her false documents and scattered them around the shack, made it look like they'd been planning a different operation entirely. Celia hid the real papers in a hollow log outside, insurance in case the plan failed. Naomi checked her pistol one last time, then threw it into the cold fireplace. They had to look defeated, helpless. The horses stopped outside. Boots hit the ground. Spurs rang like tiny bells. "Come out real slow," Morgan's voice called. "Hands where I can see them." They emerged into the pre-dawn darkness. Morgan sat his horse like a king on a throne. His wounded shoulder was bandaged, but his gun hand was steady. "Well, well, the famous Freedmen's Bureau agents." His smile was cold as winter. "And my old friend Isaiah Kane." Isaiah said nothing. His hands were raised, but his eyes never left Morgan's face. "Found your little hideout. Found your plans, too." Morgan held up one of Ruth's false documents. "Operation Clearwater's been moved up, happening tonight instead of tomorrow." Ruth let relief flicker across her face for just a moment. The bait was taken. "You're too late," she said. "Am I?" Morgan's laugh was harsh as breaking glass. "See? That's where you're wrong, little girl. I've got federal marshals riding into my trap tonight. Judge Whitman thinks he's so smart, positioning his men based on your stolen intelligence." The blood drained from Ruth's face. Morgan knew about the trap, had known all along. "Surprised? You shouldn't be. Whitman's been feeding me information for months. Every move your Freedmen's Bureau makes, every agent they send." Morgan's grin widened. "He's not your father, girl. He's my partner." The world tilted sideways. Ruth's perfect memory scrambled to make sense of it. Every letter, every coded message, every careful phrase that had passed between them. All of it had been a lie. "Tie them up," Morgan ordered his men. "We've got a schedule to keep." Rough hands grabbed them. Ropes bit into their wrists. The trap they'd planned had become their cage. As they were loaded onto horses, Isaiah caught Celia's eye. A message passed between them. This wasn't over. Not yet. But as they rode deeper into the desert night, the weight of their failure pressed down like stone. 200 Apache families would die at dawn. Judge Whitman was corrupt. The federal marshals were riding into an ambush. And, somewhere in the darkness, Morgan's real plan was already in motion. The horses carried them toward an old mining camp where ruins jutted from the earth like broken teeth. A place where secrets went to die. Isaiah felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, not rage, something worse. The certainty that some battles could not be won, some prices could not be paid, some choices led only to graves. The mining camp appeared ahead like a vision of hell. Firelight flickered between broken walls. More men waited in the shadows. And somewhere in that maze of ruins, Isaiah was about to learn the final truth about his family, the truth that would change everything. The mining camp squatted against the mountainside like a wound that refused to heal. Broken timber frames jutted from the earth. Rusted equipment lay scattered where men had dropped it and walked away. But tonight the camp lived again. Fires burned in the ruins. Armed men moved between the shadows. Morgan's operation had found a perfect grave to hide its sins. They were dragged from their horses and tied to posts in what had once been the main shaft building. The ropes cut deep. Isaiah's shoulders burned from the awkward angle. Morgan dismounted, slowly favoring his wounded shoulder. He walked to a broken crate and sat down like a king claiming his throne. "You want to know about your family, Kane?" Isaiah's jaw clenched. He said nothing. "Sarah was real pretty. Little Mary had your eyes." Morgan's voice carried the casual cruelty of a man describing livestock. "Too bad you'll never see them again." "Where are they?" Morgan reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio. Photographs spilled onto the crate. Images of a woman and child. Letters in careful handwriting. Proof of life that had sustained Isaiah's hope for 2 years. "They've been dead since the day I took them." The words hit like physical blows. Isaiah's vision blurred. His breath caught in his throat. "These pictures?" Morgan held up a photograph. "Took them right before. Letters? Forced Sarah to write them while I held a gun to little Mary's head." The portfolio went up in flames. Morgan dropped it into the nearest fire. Photographs curled and blackened. Letters turned to ash. 2 years you've been dancing to my tune. 2 years you've been my hunting dog thinking you were saving them." Morgan's laugh was like breaking glass. "Every job you did for me, every man you killed, all for ghosts." Isaiah sagged against his bonds. The weight of his choices pressed down like mountain stone. Every compromise, every moral line crossed. All of it for nothing. Ruth watched the photographs burn and felt something break inside her chest. Not hope. Something deeper. The belief that justice was possible in a world built on lies. "Why?" she whispered. Morgan turned to her. "Because I could. Because it worked. Because broken men make the best tools." Celia tested her ropes. The knots were tight but not perfect. Given time, she might work free. But time was something they no longer had. "The Apache families," she said. "You're still going through with it." "Of course, business is business." Morgan checked his pocket watch. "My men are already in position. Come sunrise, 200 families disappear. The territorial government blames Apache raiders. I sell them south to Mexico." He stood and walked to Isaiah, leaned close enough that his breath was hot against Isaiah's ear. "Your wife begged for Mary's life. Right up until the end." Morgan's voice was barely a whisper. "Want to know what her last words were?" Isaiah's eyes closed, his whole body trembled. "She said she forgave you for not coming sooner." Something inside Isaiah shattered. Not his heart. Hearts could heal. This was deeper. The part of a man that believes tomorrow might be better than today. But in that moment of absolute despair, he heard something else. Hoofbeats. Many horses moving fast across hard ground. Morgan heard it too. His head snapped up. His hand dropped to his gun. "That's not my men," he said. The sound grew louder. Closer. A cavalry charge in the dead of night. Federal marshals poured into the mining camp like water through a broken dam. They came from 3 directions at once. Surrounded. Contained. Crushed. Judge Whitman rode at their head. The gunfight was brief and brutal. Morgan's men were caught off guard, trapped in a box canyon with nowhere to run. Some surrendered. Others died where they stood. When the smoke cleared, Judge Whitman dismounted near the prisoners. He was older than his daughters expected. Gray hair, tired eyes, the weight of too many hard choices written in the lines of his face. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said. Celia stared at him as her bonds were cut. "Ruth said you were working with Morgan." "I was, for 6 months, feeding him false information while I built a real case." Whitman's voice was heavy with regret. "I knew he had spies in the Freedmen's Bureau. The only way to protect you was to make him think I was corrupted too." Ruth's perfect memory sorted through the implications. Every letter, every coded message, every careful phrase that had passed between them, All of it had been real. All of it had been love disguised as betrayal. The Apache families? Safe. My marshals moved them 3 days ago. Morgan's men found empty camps. Morgan himself had vanished in the chaos. Blood on the ground suggested he'd been wounded, but his body was nowhere to be found. Isaiah remained tied to his post even after the others were freed. He stared at the ashes where his family's photographs had burned. His face was carved from stone. Naomi approached him, slowly. Her hands were gentle as she cut his ropes. "I'm sorry," she said. Isaiah said nothing. His hands fell to his sides like dead things. 1 month later, they gathered outside the territorial courthouse. Morgan's trial had ended with a life sentence in federal prison. His network was broken, his operation destroyed, but victory felt hollow as winter wind. Celia had accepted a position with the territorial government. Official investigator. Real authority to make real change. Ruth would teach at the new integrated school. Fill young minds with hope and knowledge. Naomi had joined the territorial marshals. Her anger finally had a badge and a purpose. Isaiah stood apart from the group. He planned to head north, start over somewhere his ghosts couldn't follow. As they prepared to part ways, Ruth handed him an envelope. "This came yesterday," she said. Isaiah's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was dated 2 years ago, delayed in the territorial mail system, lost until now. He read it twice before the words made sense. "My son," he whispered. "He's alive. He's been looking for me." Hope flickered in his eyes like candlelight in wind. But the postmark was old. The address was from California. 2 years of searching had ended in disappointment. His son had given up and moved on. Isaiah stared at the letter for a long time. Then he slowly crumpled it in his fist. The sisters watched him walk away into the desert sunset. A man, finally, free but utterly alone. The weight of his choices would follow him like his own shadow. Celia spoke softly to her sisters. Her words were barely audible above the evening wind. Some kinds of freedom cost more than chains ever did. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.